Okay, so for our animation in general, we have 125 frames for our shot. We're going to be animating and caching out our animation. And since we're going to want to offset our animations along the branch or slide things around, we want to make sure that we have enough frames of animation to cover us. So we're actually going to add some extra length to our animation now. Now, how many frames extra you need will depend on your shot. If you want a lot of flexibility, you'll need more. But of course, that's more animation to do and more to cache out. On other production jobs I've done, I might even go almost double the overall length of our shot, just so that we assure we have enough handles of animation on our initial geometry that we're caching for our individual elements. But here for this course, I'm going to add just 1 second extra. There's going to be a lot of data to cache anyway, so I'm just going to try and be as lean as possible. So an extra 1 second means that we're going to animate for 150 frames. So I'm just going to adjust our timeline to that for 150 frames. And just to be clear, we're still going to render 125 frames for our final shot. But just for now, while we're animating these elements, let's just temporarily set this to be 150 frames, and we'll set this back later. Okay, so for our 150 frames, I'm planning on maybe doing the first 75 or 100 frames just to have the plant unfolding or growing on. And then the 50 frames at the end will be just sort of slightly moving, just so we have a little bit of motion and it doesn't feel dead or stopped in our shot. It doesn't have to be exact, but something around that within our 150 frames I think will work nicely. Okay, so let's start by animating our bulb. I'm going to come back up here, just remind ourselves this is what we have currently. I think I'm just going to quickly reshape this a little bit. If I come to this revolve, I just want to make this a little bit more angled here, a bit more like a vase shape. I'm going to come to our curve. I'm going to press S to select, press 2 to go to point mode. I'm just going to bring this in a little bit and just view our revolve while we do this. So come here, grab this one, press T. I'm just going to move this in slightly. I'm being very picky here, but just was bugging me a little bit, so I'm going to change it to that. Okay, so we've got a resample after that. We are setting our points on the x-axis to be 0. Let's just call that set 0 in x. And in fact, let's actually just reorder that. I want to set our points to be along 0 and x first. Then we're going to resample it to make our subdivided spline, which goes into our revolve. Okay, so let's animate this now. So one of my favorite new features of Houdini is KineFX, which is their new rigging system. This can use splines to create joint chains, and then you can use that to deform and animate your meshes. Now, I've not even dived too deep into this yet, but one thing I really love is that it makes it really simple when you want to rig and animate splines for keyframing. So we can do this to actually rig our spline now. So we're going to come up just before our resample, so where we have our original spline shape here, and let's put down a skeleton sop. And this is one of the new KineFX sops here. We are going to stash input and press OK. And this is going to store the state of our points inside the sop for us here. If we come over to our handle tool here, zoom in, you can see it's now already gone in and created joints out of our individual polygon lines, or our like spline edges here. So now we've got that set up, we can put down what's called a rig pose to animate these. Just going to select these, just color them green so I can remember these are the animation for this bit. So under our rig pose, again, I've got my handle selected so I can see these. I'm just going to come in, I'm going to click on our first point at the bottom here, and then our next point from that. And you can see it's actually adding these in as groups into our rig pose here. So I'm going to carry on and just add this one, add this one. Oh, not going to move that. Let's just zoom in and select that one there. I'm not going to move that last one. We're not going to animate this. We're just going to do these 4 here. So I'm going to curl this one up and sort of let this unfold, which will sort of unfold our revolve. So what we really want to do is animate rotating around our x-axis, if you can see there. So we'll do our x-axis, and then we'll also animate the scale of our joint as well. So let's come to our 4 points. I'm going to set the frame to be about maybe, let's do 75. And I'm just going to press Alt and click on the rotate for each one. Just rotate X. We're not going to rotate the other Y and Z axes here. So just X, sorry, Alt click on that. And I'm also going to Alt click on the scale as well, because we're going to be wanting to animate that one as well. Okay, so let's go back now to the first frame, and going in sequence, let's start from the end here, point 3. Just going to middle mouse click on our rotate X, and I'm just going to rotate that one in. Not going to be too precise, but sort of something like this. I'm going to Alt click and create another keyframe here. I'm going to do the same for our point 2, so that's going to fold this one in on itself. I'm going to Alt click again, come down to our next point, move that one in, and I'm going to Alt click again. And finally, our first point, we can just animate that one in like so. Again, Alt click to set the keyframe. Now I'm also going to animate the scale next. So come back to our last point here again, and I'm just going to middle mouse click and drag on our scale here just to scale that one in a little bit. Something around that, I think. Now Alt click on scale to set keyframes for all of those. You do the same for the one before that. Oh, a bit too far. Let's try that one. Let's take the one before that. Scale that one in a little bit. Maybe not quite as much. And just a little bit for the last one, so maybe just that much, 0.6 or so. I'm going to Alt click on that one too. So we've kind of got this unfolding now. If we go down, we can see with the revolve, this is actually kind of unfolding out like this. Now let's just go back to our spline, and I just want to offset our keyframes a little bit. I just want to have it so that our bottom one sort of moves first, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. So we're going to sort of stagger our keyframes slightly. I'm going to come up to our animation editor here. I'm going to press H to zoom in. I'm just going to select rig pose, deselect it, reselect it. Sometimes it gets a bit stuck, but if you deselect and reselect, you should see all your keyframes there that you've set. It's going to zoom out a little bit more. And so we're going to take our first point and leave it as is. We're going to shift the keyframes of our second joint, shift the keyframes of our third joint a little bit more, and the fourth one will just shift a little bit more again. So if we come here, rig point 0 was our first one. I'm going to take rig point 1, just going to select all of those. I'm going to drag this little vertical handle and just drag it across a few frames. I'm going to do the same for the second. Not being too precise here, I just want to give a little bit of sort of separation between the different joints. I'm going to bring the fourth one across to this. I'm going to press Control A to select all, and you can see we've got a bit of a sort of stagger between all of these now. I might just bring the second one across a little bit more because it feels a little bit uneven there. So just, well, it wasn't that one, it was 0.1, this one here. I'm just going to drag it across a couple more frames like that. So pressing Control A now, you can see these are a bit more spaced out. I'm also going to just deselected that somehow. Let's select this again, make sure we're in our handle mode, come back to our animation editor. Make sure all of these are selected by deselecting and reselecting. I'm going to select all of these, and I'm just going to control and drag our handles a little bit because I just want to essentially give a bit more emphasis to the ease in and ease out of our animation. It's just a little bit like that. Going back to our scene view now, if we were to play through this, I'm just going to turn on our real-time toggle here. You can see that we now have first this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. It's a slight sort of adjustment here, but I think it adds a little bit of nice sort of cascading motion to our unfolding here. So that goes through our resample, and we get that. And I've actually kept this as just using maximum segments because I'm trying to keep the point count the same. If we were to use maximum segment length and I turn on our point count, you can see as this unfolds, we're actually creating new points. If I leave this at maximum segments, we're always going to stick to a maximum of 10 points. And the reason for this is because I want to use motion blur later. And if we're changing our point count as we're moving along, this is going to mess up our motion blur calculation later. So I'm personally here trying to keep my animation to keep a fixed number of points as I animate these plants. So let's come down here. We've got our revolve. I think I might just try and push this in a little bit more at the start so it's a little bit more narrow. I'm going to come back to the rig pose. It was our group 0 point that we wanted to adjust. And just on our first frame, I'm going to take the rotate and just shift it a little bit more to the middle like that. Again, it's super subtle, but just a little bit of something that I want to add in there. Okay, so we've got our mounting going through that, which is kind of deforming this quite a little bit too much now, I think. If we come down to our poly extrude and our subdivide, it's kind of messed things up quite a bit. I think the mountain's a little bit too strong here, so I'm going to come to our height. I'm just going to bring it down to about, let's say 0.8, 0.7. And I think I'm just going to animate this down as it gets smaller. Because this is shrinking down, it's kind of a little bit too strong when we're down here. So maybe around sort of frame 60, I'm going to keyframe the height to be 0.07, and maybe around sort of 30, let's just bring it down to about, say, 0.2. Something like that. And the nice thing is because our animation is going into our mountain and the mountain is deforming afterwards, it kind of gives this moving noise feel that I feel looks quite organic and nice. So I'm going to leave that in like that. Let's next check our poly extrude and see if that's all good. We might need to adjust this as well, I feel. Check it with the subdivision. That's not too bad. I think I might just scale in our overall distance maybe as well. So around here, maybe around 60 again. I'm just going to keyframe our distance to be 0.015 and just come back to about frame 30. Just bring it in a little bit, maybe to 0.05, just so it's a little bit thinner at the start. I'm going to press Alt and keyframe that as well. Okay, so I've got this transformed onto our Z axis here. Press play. You can see it sort of opens up like this. It's a little slow, but this is going to be a sort of nice blooming slow animation across the branch. So I think this is going to look quite nice with this sort of speed. Okay, so next let's set up our growing on of our stem. If we come back up here to our resample, this was our spline we are using. We're orientating along the spline, and then we were going to carve it. So this is how we're going to grow this on. So I'm going to come to maybe around frame 100, and I'm just going to set a keyframe on our second U here. Remember, this is controlling what's going to be our growth of our stem. So I'm going to alt click our second U here to be 1 at around frame 100. And I'm going to go back to our start. And I'm going to set this not to be 0, because if you remember from before, we found that if we go back to 0, we're going to delete all our points and we lose our flower bulb here. So I'm going to maybe set this to about 0.05, and I'm going to alt click on this now as well. So here's our animation of our stem. I'm going to come over to our animation editor. I'm going to press H to line this one up. And I think I'm just going to give a bit more ease into this. So I'm going to select this keyframe, press Control, and just drag this one out. Pressing Control just constrains your handle to remain flat, so you can just drag it out without adjusting it like this. So undo that, select this, hold Control, and just drag this out a little bit more. I'm going to maybe drag the first one out a little bit, and maybe extend this a little bit further so there's a nice sort of long ease out. Come down to our sweep, we can see this now. And if we were to look and see the merged result, this is all of them together. Now we seem to have a few attributes coming in here. I suspect this is from our KineFX. If I middle mouse click on this, you can see we've got a bunch of attributes that KineFX has added here. So just after the merge, I'm going to put down an attribute delete so that we clear out those spare attributes. What have we got? I think we're just going to blast all of these. There's nothing particular we need. Might keep the UVs, but the rest of that can go. So point attribute, let's just delete everything. Vertex attributes, we'll leave our UVs just in case. There's nothing in our primitives. And for our detail, we'll just delete this variable map thing as well. So the next thing I want to do is actually have this stem scale up as well as it grows, because at the moment the radius of it is staying the same, so it looks really sort of fat and stumpy at the start here. We can easily do this by going to our carve, and we can right click on our second U and just do copy parameter. We can come down to our sweep, and we're going to multiply our radius by that. Because our carve's going from 0 or close enough up to 1, we can use this kind of like a multiplier. So if I type multiplied by and just do right click, paste relative reference, this is now linking the two, and so we now have an animated carve that will scale up as we carve it. The next thing I actually want to do is probably at the start just scale all of this down so it scales up from 0. So I'm going to come below all this. I'm going to put down a transform SOP. Maybe come to about frame 35. Alt click on our uniform scale, set a keyframe there, go back to 1, and just set this to 0. So we're scaling it off completely. I'm going to come to our animation editor, just press H, zoom out a little bit. And as usual, I'm just going to give a little bit of an ease into that so it's not quite so linear. Gives it a bit more of a ease in to our movement. Just see how that looks. Feels nice to me. It kind of scales up and then continues the path. One other thing I forgot to mention, let's go back to our sweep a second, is the whole point again about having consistent points. You'll notice because we're carving this line here, if I turn on our point numbers, you can see we're actually changing our point count. And again, as we go down, this means our sweep is having a changing point count. So we can quite easily fix this just by putting down another resample SOP. I'm going to put that in there, connect this one up. Up here we set this to be 15 segments. I'm just going to do this again. So I'm going to turn off our maximum segment length, and I'm going to turn on our maximum segments and just change this to be 15. And by doing this after the carve, we're essentially going to redistribute those 15 points along the curve after we have trimmed it. So we are now keeping all our points consistent. Turn off our points there. Come down again. So the last thing I want to do, I think, for this one is, Obviously we've got it growing up now, which is nice, but I want to add a little bit of movement to the end because at the moment it just comes to a stop and then it's static. So we're going to add some noise to our overall flower here. And I use noise for so much stuff rather than trying to sim stuff. I think just using noise, to your points, often can get you so far. So let's come back up to our original spline here. And let's see, we shall put it just, I think, before our orient along curve. Let's add some noise in here after the initial resample. So I'm going to put down a point VOP. Let's click on that and dive inside. And I prefer to add noise this way personally, just because it's much easier, I find anyway. So I'm going to put down a anti-aliased noise. I think will work. There's a few different noises we can use, but let's just go for anti-alias for now. Let's set our signature to be 3D input and go for 3D output because we want noise to vary in X, Y, and Z, not just have a single value of noise. And we're going to connect our P to our position. We're going to add our position with our noise we've just created, and then we're going to re-output that to our position. We're going to come to our noise here. We're going to just right click on this, come to Vex VOP options and just create input parameters. And that will just quickly add all your inputs there. It's the same as if you were to right click on one of these and just do promote parameter, but this does all of them at once, which is quite nice. I'm going to come back up to the top and let's just adjust a few of these settings. I'm going to bring our roughness down to 0 so it's a bit smoother. I am going to maybe adjust our frequency, maybe leave it about 1, about 0.9, about 1 I think is fine. And let's come to our offset, and I'm going to animate this just to flow through our points here. I'm going to bring the amplitude down as well because that's way too strong at the moment. I think maybe around 0.2 or near enough is going to be right about what we need. So if I animate this now, we've got a little bit of motion to this. It's going to come to our offset X. I'm going to type attribute frame divided by 2. So it's going to take our current frame number, divide it by 2. And that is going to give us a little bit of wiggle that's way too fast. I think in fact, not frame, let's just use time. Yeah, that's much slower. So time is seconds, frame will be your frame number. So with time, it's just 1 every 25 frames, and then we're dividing that by 2. So we've got animated noise going on now, but we don't want this to happen all the way through our plant here. If we come down to the end, you can see the whole thing is kind of shaking now. We want to just have it sort of affect the end here. So we're going to do this by creating an attribute on our spline up at the top. It's a standard attribute called curve U. I'm sure most of you have come across this. And we can create this just by turning on our checkbox here for curve U. It's going to create a 0 to 1 value, 0 at the base of our spline, 1 at the top, and a nice blend in between. Inside our point VOP, let's come down here, and we're just going to bring this curve U attribute in by putting down a bind. It's called curve U. It's a float attribute. We're going to put this through a ramp parameter just so that we can tweak this and re-ramp or readjust or remap even this value. We'll make the ramp type be spline ramp, and we're going to connect our curve U to our input. And we'll take the output of this ramp and we're going to multiply that with our noise. So basically at the start of the ramp, at the start of our spline, where it's 0, it'll be multiplying our noise with 0, so it's going to have no effect. And at the end of our ramp, the end of our spline here, where it's 1, it's going to multiply our noise with 1, it'll have full effect. We're going to come back up now, come to our point VOP, let's have that selected. With ramps, they always come in at 0, so we're just going to come up here. You can either adjust it yourself or just come here and just type linear. And you can see now if we press play, this is affecting just the end. And we can even just drag these in further to sort of tweak and refine the area that it's affecting. I think somewhere in the middle like this. If I was to increase this, you can see it's a lot more apparent now. We have the animation at the end and nothing at the start. So I'm going to set this back to 0.2. Come down to our end here. And I think I might actually just keep our curve view attribute on our geometry because we might be able to use this with shading later. So if I come to our attribute delete, I'm just going to type this little up arrow and type curve U. And this means we won't be deleting this. So if I now middle mouse click on this, in fact I'm going to control middle mouse and just click on our curve view, you can see we've now got this attribute that runs along the end of our plant. And the reason it's also on our bulb is because when we put it on copy to points, the value of our curve view on our spline gets copied across to our copy to points. So it's actually applied to our bulb here. So this is all nicely working together. I'm going to turn that one off for now. And that is the first part of our animation for this plant. Okay, on to the next.